you regularly compare Berkshire Hathaway's performance to the S&P 500, which is very helpful and very interesting. But I haven't seen a correlation coefficient between the S&P 500 daily, from day-to-day performance. It would be very helpful to know the extent of a correlation coefficient between those two variables. If you have that, would you let us know what it is? And if you don't, would you please consider calculating it in the future?
Well, it could be calculated, but I don't think it would have much meaning. I mean, it would be an historical correlation coefficient, which, you know, I would be very reluctant to have people place any weight in. I try to indicate even the limitations of the yearly comparison of the relative performance, because what was doable by us in the past is not doable today. I mentioned in my annual report the best decade I ever had on comparative performance by far was the 50s. Now, I don't think it was because I was a lot smarter then, but I was working with it. That has no relevance to today whatsoever. It would be misleading to publish it or to make calculations based on it. I don't know what you'd find on a specific correlation between Berkshire and the S&P. I don't really think that's particularly useful information going forward. We'd have no objection anybody wants to make the calculation, but it wouldn't be something that would be of any utility to us. And if we don't think it's of utility to us, we don't want to put it out for shareholders as being a possible utility. We don't pay any attention to beta or any of that sort of thing. It just doesn't mean anything to us. We're only interested in price and value. And that's what we're focusing on all the time. And any kind of market movements or anything don't mean anything. I don't know what Berkshire is selling for today, and it really makes no difference. You know, it just doesn't make any difference. What does count is where it is 10 years from now, and that's where all the focus is. We don't think anything that relates either to volume, price action, relative strength, any of that sort of thing. And bear in mind, when I was in my teens, I used to eat that stuff up. I mean, I was making calculations based on it all the time and kept charts on it and even wrote an article or two on it. But it just has no place in the operation now.
One of the pleasant things about dealing with Warren all these years is he's never talked about a correlation coefficient.
And that's why all the discussion about standard deviations and volatility and beta and all those things just sound silly to me. In other words, if you really, really believe what Buffett says, which is, I am buying a piece of a business, okay? I'm buying a piece of a business, and if I bought the whole business, I'd be paying this, so I'm buying a piece of it at that valuation, and I think that's, 50 or 60% of what I think the business is worth, and I do that 4 or 5 times, to me that's prudent investing. And once you start worrying about how the pricing of those businesses will jump around over 6 and 12-month periods, it starts to sound ridiculous. I mean, really analyzing risk that way, which is how most of the institutional investment world analyzes risk. And I think I would always, whenever you get in that discussion, which you will be, what was your Sharpe ratio, what was your standard deviation, all those different things. If you're really thinking about you're owning a piece of a business, you would never think, if you were a real estate developer and owned 5 different properties that you thought you bought cheap, or whatever, the rents were paying me such and such 15% a year, and I was able to buy it at that valuation, and I bought 5 of these. Would you care how it bounced around, over a year and 2 period? You wouldn't even think of it. And it's the same way with businesses. And it's very important to think about, because very few people think that way. Very, very few people, and it's one of the secrets, one of the simple secrets. Your risk is that the business turns down. The risk is that, they go from 1 million square feet to 200,000 square feet, and then out of business. You do have business. You're taking business risk. You're not taking volatility risk, or you're taking risk based on what is the income stream going to be. What are your coupons going to be from that investment? What are your earnings coupons going to be from that investment? That's the risk you're taking. If you understand that, and so you might want to have more than 5, you might want to go to 8, because you don't want to take that coupon risk from that business. But it has nothing to do with any of the measures, the volatility measures that are used generally to assess investments. It is true that people are influenced by those, and if you're going to be one of those people, then you want to know how volatile your business investment's going to be. Having said that, looking at past betas or past volatility really will have nothing to do with future volatility. So, and then, you know, of course, who's done a cross-correlation matrix between anyone? Okay. You know, I don't get that either. You know, and it's very complicated stuff to do, and people do it all the time, and it's hard to do. But it's all based on assumptions, you know, garbage in, garbage out, and I think most of the assumptions are garbage. And I think it's taught because people have invested a lot of time learning the math. You know, I think Haugen wrote it up, said, you know, big investment in this theory, and it's elegant. It just makes assumptions that are completely unrealistic and, you know, not really that worthwhile in the real world. So I think Mr. Market does crazy things sometimes, and that's great in the short term. And what I told you in the long term is Mr. Market gets it right. Okay? There's a lot of reasons for that. You know, who can name some reasons why Mr. Market gets it right over the long term?
Oh, the fundamentals of business sort of reveal themselves over the long term.
I think that's the big... Right, I think that's the big picture answer. There may be uncertainty right now and fear or whatever there might be in the stock price, but over time, whatever those fears or issues were, resolve themselves. Now, it may take 2 or 3 years for those things to resolve themselves, but eventually they do, right? And then smart people, if it's still trading at a bargain, will buy it. People who are doing the analysis will buy it when the uncertainty is done. And that could take 2 or 3 years. It could happen in 6 months, could happen in a week. Could happen, generally it happens within 2 to 3 years, almost always within 2 to 3 years. That happens. Another thing that could happen is company sees their stocks cheap, they might buy it back. They may view that as a good investment. That's another way that stock prices get pushed up to fair value. Another way would be what? Takeover or threat of takeover, right? You don't really have to have a takeover. Just, you know, if you buy all the shares up, that's all, you own the company. So the fact that that can happen at some time, if there's not too many takeover barriers, means that the market, eventually the stock will start trading towards what it's worth. Otherwise, someone's going to come in and do it for you, either a big company. So that's how Mr. Market gets rational over a period of time. And even statistically, if I look at it, it generally, on average, happens even in a year period. But almost always it happens within 2 to 3 years. Not always, but almost always. It happens within 2 to 3 years. And that's such a powerful concept. It's like, forget the market, okay? I want to do my analysis. If there's a big enough discount, I'm going to assume that over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm going to get my money. And if you just keep thinking that way, forget about anything else. It becomes a very simple process. It becomes a process of how good a valuation can I do? And if the stock's at 10 and you think the valuation range is 15 to 20, that may be close enough, depending on when you think it's going to be there. But even over 2 to 3 years, that's still a pretty good rate of return. So you might not have to pinpoint exactly what it's worth, but if you think 15 to 20, it's at 10, that's kind of interesting.